My name is Amara Williams, and for years my colleagues had a special name for me. They called me the charity case. To them, it was just a bit of harmless workplace banter, a running joke about the adopted girl on the team. So when I finally sued them for harassment, I walked into that courtroom braced for a brutal, soul-crushing fight for my dignity. I thought the entire case was about my career. I never ever imagined the judge would uncover a secret from my past so staggering it would leave the entire room, myself included, utterly speechless. I was fighting for justice, but what I found was a truth I never knew existed. A truth that shattered and then rebuilt my entire world in the space of a single heartbeat. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, and leave your like. Helps a lot. I've always seen the world a little differently. In the sweep of a roofline, the rhythm of a colonnade, the conversation between a building and the sky. While other kids were playing with dolls, I was building these sprawling, elaborate cities out of wooden blocks, sketching blueprints for impossible fantasy castles in my spiral notebooks. For me, architecture wasn't just a career choice. It felt like a calling, an essential part of my very being. My parents, two of the most wonderful people you could ever hope to meet, saw that passion in me from the very beginning. They saw the fire in my eyes and spent my entire childhood fanning it into a brilliant flame. They were my rock, my everything, my tireless cheerleaders. They adopted me when I was just a toddler, a little girl found with no name and no history. They gave me both. They gave me the name Amara, which means grace, and they gave me a history filled with unwavering love and the constant gentle reassurance that I was chosen, wanted, and deeply cherished. Being adopted was a fact of my story, of course, but my parents never ever let it define me. In our home, it was just a piece of information like my brown eye color or the fact I was tall for my age, not some brand I had to wear. Thanks to them, I grew up confident, deeply loved, and utterly secure in who I was. After graduating at the very top of my class from a prestigious architecture school, I landed what I truly believed was my dream job. A coveted position at Innovate Architecture, one of the most celebrated firms in the city. Their work was the kind that made you stop and stare. Their buildings didn't just occupy space. They spoke to it, they sang with it. They were artists as much as they were engineers, and I was beyond thrilled, practically vibrating with excitement to be a part of it all. The first few months were a whirlwind of intoxicating challenges. The work was demanding, the projects were inspiring, and I felt with every fiber of my being that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I was learning so much, my ideas were actually being incorporated into designs, and I truly believed I was earning the respect of the senior partners. Or so I thought. My immediate team was led by a senior architect named Mark. He was one of those effortlessly charismatic, undeniably talented men that everyone in the firm seemed to look up to. He had a razor-sharp wit and a magnetic confidence that allowed him to command any room he walked into. His inner circle included Sarah and Kevin, two other architects who seemed to exist in his orbit, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes and echoing his opinions. In the beginning, I was just eager to impress them all, to prove that I had the talent to belong there. The shift was so subtle at first that I almost didn't notice it. It began with a faint, patronizing tone that crept into their interactions with me. I'd present a new concept in a team meeting, and Mark would offer a thin smile. "That's a very earnest idea, Amara," he'd say, the word earnest landing like a soft insult. "Good for you for speaking up." The praise always felt hollow, as if coated in a slick layer of something I couldn't quite name. Sarah and Kevin would exchange these quick, knowing glances, tiny smirks they thought I didn't see. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I was the new person on the block who simply needed to pay her dues. I pushed the uneasy feeling deep down and focused on my work, pouring all my energy into making my designs more intricate, my research more exhaustive. I was determined to win them over with pure, undeniable talent. The moment the subtle digs morphed into something openly cruel is burned into my memory. It happened about 6 months into my job. We were in a major project meeting, brainstorming ideas for a new community center. The firm had a pro bono branch, and this particular project was for a local orphanage. My heart leaped. This was exactly the kind of work I was passionate about. architecture with a soul, design that could genuinely help people. I'd spent the entire weekend completely immersed in the project, developing a concept filled with wide-open spaces, abundant natural light, and cozy, intimate nooks. A place designed to feel more like a sprawling, welcoming home than a cold institution. When it was my turn, I presented my ideas with a genuine passion in my voice, my hands gesturing as I described the flow and feeling I wanted to create. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. One of the senior partners, a kind-faced man named Mr. Davies, nodded slowly, a look of genuine appreciation on his face. "That's a very thoughtful approach, Amara. Very well conceived." A warm flash of pride bloomed in my chest. But then the moment was shattered. Mark leaned back in his leather chair, a smug, self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "Well, of course it is," he said, his voice dripping with a false, saccharine sincerity. "Amara would naturally have a personal investment in a project for an orphanage. She has first-hand experience with that sort of thing after all." The air was instantly sucked out of the room. The silence was deafening. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but Sarah and Kevin let out quiet, appreciative snickers. My blood ran ice-cold. He had taken this one private part of my story, the part my parents had always wrapped in so much love and warmth, and twisted it into a cruel public weapon. In front of all my colleagues, he had just reduced my entire identity, my talent, and my hard work down to a crude, pitiful stereotype. The humiliation was a physical force. My face was on fire, and I could feel hot tears stinging the backs of my eyes. I desperately wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I risked a glance at Mark, and his eyes were cold and triumphant. He had found a vulnerability, and he had just pressed on it with all his weight, right in front of everyone. I managed to mumble something incoherent about wanting to create a welcoming space and then shrank back in my chair, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. Mr. Davies shot Mark a sharp, disapproving look but didn't say a word. The meeting moved on, but for me, everything had irrevocably changed. The dream job was rapidly becoming a waking nightmare. That meeting was only the beginning. It opened the floodgates to what became a relentless, soul-crushing campaign of daily harassment. What had started as one shocking comment evolved into a daily torment that chipped away at my confidence and my spirit. The nickname came next. At first, it was a whisper I'd catch as I walked past their cluster of desks. The charity case. But soon they weren't even trying to hide it. It became their favorite joke. At team lunches, if I offered to pay for my share, Kevin would laugh and wave my money away. "No, we've got it," he'd say loudly enough for others to hear. "We can't have our little charity case paying." Sarah would chime in, her eyes wide with mock innocence. "It's our good deed for the day." They'd say it with these broad, disarming smiles, as if it were the funniest, most clever joke in the world. Each time, it was another sharp stab of humiliation. The name was designed to erase my accomplishments, to reframe my presence at the firm not as a result of my talent, but as an act of pity. I wasn't their colleague. I was their pet project. Then, the professional sabotage began. It was insidious, calculated to make me look incompetent and unreliable. I'd spend days working on a critical blueprint, only to find the file on the shared server mysteriously corrupted the next morning, setting me back by days. Important client emails with revised deadlines would somehow never arrive in my inbox. I walked into one major presentation only to find that my final polished slides had been replaced with an old, incomplete draft. The panic and shame I felt in that moment, fumbling in front of a client, was exactly what they wanted. Mark, of course, was the puppet master, and he perfected the art of pretending to be sympathetic. "Amara, you really need to be more careful with your files," he'd say with a concerned frown during a team meeting, the day after I knew he'd been the last one to access the server. He was gaslighting me, expertly making me question my own sanity. Was I really that careless? Was I losing my mind? I became obsessive, saving my files in 3 different locations, emailing copies to myself, triple-checking everything, but somehow things still went wrong. And with every manufactured mistake, Mark would swoop in to save the day, often presenting my own recovered ideas as his brilliant solutions while I was left looking flustered and incompetent. After 3 months of this constant psychological warfare, I hit my breaking point. I had lost a noticeable amount of weight, I couldn't sleep through the night, and my once solid confidence was in tatters. The joy I once felt for my work had been replaced by a knot of dread that tightened in my stomach every morning. I decided I had to go to human resources. I spent an entire weekend meticulously documenting every single incident. The dates of the comments, the specific nature of the sabotage, the names of witnesses. I walked into the HR office with a thick folder and a small, fragile flicker of hope. That hope was extinguished in less than 15 minutes. The head of HR, a man named Mr. Henderson, barely glanced at my meticulously compiled folder. He listened to my story with a long, weary sigh, rhythmically tapping his pen on his polished desk as I spoke. "Amara," he said the moment I finished, his tone dripping with condescension. "Mark is one of our star architects. He brings in a lot of business. Are you sure you're not just being a little sensitive?" I stared at him, speechless. Sensitive? They call me their charity case. They are actively sabotaging my work. "Workplace culture can be tough," he said, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers. "From where I'm sitting, it sounds like some light-hearted banter that you're misinterpreting. My advice: go back out there, develop a thicker skin, and try to fit in." He pushed my folder back across the desk toward me, unopened. "I'm sure this will all blow over." I walked out of his office feeling utterly and completely defeated. My body felt heavy, as if weighted down with lead. The one department that was supposed to protect employees had just told me that the problem wasn't the abuse, it was my reaction to it. I was completely and utterly alone. The final, soul-crushing straw came a few months later at the company's glittering annual awards gala. I almost didn't go. The thought of being in the same room with them, of faking smiles and pretending everything was fine, made me feel physically ill. But I knew that not showing up would be seen as weakness, another victory for them. So I put on a brave face, a new dress, and walked with my head held high straight into the lion's den. The biggest award of the night was Project of the Year, and it went to the Community Center project, my project. Mark, Sarah, and Kevin made their way to the stage to accept the award. Mark took the microphone, a triumphant, predatory gleam in his eye. He thanked the partners, the clients, and then he paused, scanning the crowd. "I also have to give a huge thank you to my incredible team," he began. "Sarah, Kevin, absolute rock stars. This project taught us so much, about dedication, about vision, and about the profound importance of charity." He then looked directly at me, his smile a cruel slash across his face. "It's truly amazing what you can accomplish when you decide to take on a charitable cause." The room, filled with people who only knew the surface-level joke, who were in on the banter, broke into a wave of polite, appreciative laughter. But I knew what he meant. He knew. And Sarah and Kevin, standing just behind him, were beaming, basking in the glow of their shared cruelty. This was their public victory lap, and I was the punchline. My heart was pounding a frantic, deafening rhythm in my ears. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick and suffocating. Without a second thought, I stood up, turned my back on the stage, and walked out of that grand ballroom, the sound of their laughter following me like a physical presence all the way to the door. Standing out in the cold night air, the tears I had been holding back for months finally broke free, streaming down my face in hot, silent tracks. That night, something inside of me shattered. But in its place, something else was forged. A cold, hard, unshakable resolve. They were not going to win. The very next day I called a lawyer. Finding Ms. Diaz was like finding a lighthouse in the middle of a raging sea. She was a sharp, fiercely intelligent, no-nonsense attorney with a formidable reputation for winning tough workplace harassment cases. In our first meeting, I laid everything out for her, my voice shaking as I recounted the past year of my life. I handed her the same thick folder that Mr. Henderson had refused to even open. She didn't just glance at it. She read every single page, her expression growing colder and angrier with each incident I had documented. She listened intently, her eyes never leaving mine, making me feel seen and heard for the first time in a very long time. When I finally finished, she looked at me, not with pity, but with a fierce, protective fire in her eyes. "Amara," she said, her voice firm and resolute, "what you've described isn't banter. It's a textbook hostile work environment, compounded by targeted sabotage. We have a case. A very strong one." For the first time in a year, a genuine flicker of hope ignited within me. She warned me that it would be a difficult and painful process. "They will try to tear you down on the stand," she said, her gaze steady. "They will paint you as an incompetent, overly emotional, disgruntled employee. You have to be ready for them to twist everything." I was ready. I was past the point of fear. The lawsuit was filed, and the battle began. As Ms. Diaz predicted, the depositions were brutal. The firm's lead attorney, a slick and condescending man, grilled me for 8 solid hours. He twisted my words, questioned my talent, and relentlessly tried to portray my emotional distress as professional instability. He brought up every single engineered mistake as supposed proof of my incompetence. Mark, Sarah, and Kevin were arrogant and dismissive, sticking to their well-rehearsed story that I was too sensitive and just couldn't take a joke. If you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe, activate notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone. But Ms. Diaz was a master. She found the cracks in their polished facade. Under her sharp questioning, she got Kevin to admit, under oath, to regularly using the charity case nickname. She got Sarah to concede that they had no actual basis for their claims that my work was substandard. She cornered Mark on his award speech, forcing him to admit that he knew I was adopted when he made the comment, and that he understood how it could be perceived as being directly about me. The firm came back with a lowball settlement offer, but it came with a major condition. I would have to sign a non-disclosure agreement and bury the story forever. Ms. Diaz advised me against it. "They're not offering this out of remorse, Amara," she told me, her voice hard. "They're trying to silence you. We should go to trial." I agreed without hesitation. This was never just about the money. It was about holding them accountable, about ensuring my story was heard. The day the trial started, my stomach was a tangled mess of knots. We were assigned to Judge Evelyn Hayes's courtroom. I had read about her. She was known for being tough, brilliant, and having zero patience for lies or dishonesty. She was an older black woman who commanded her courtroom with a quiet, unshakable authority that was almost intimidating. Walking in, I was terrified, but a small part of me felt a sense of relief. This was it. This was where the truth would finally come out. The trial unfolded over several agonizing days. Ms. Diaz was absolutely brilliant, weaving a clear and damning narrative for the jury. When it was my turn to take the stand, I could feel the hostile glares of Mark and his team from the defendant's table. I took a deep breath, looked at them for a brief moment, then turned my attention to the jury, and I told my truth. My voice trembled at first, but as I spoke, it grew steady and strong. I told them about my lifelong love for architecture, the initial joy of my dream job, and then, piece by painful piece, I detailed the mockery, the sabotage, the public humiliation, and the soul-crushing loneliness. Throughout my testimony, I started to notice something strange. Judge Hayes seemed unusually focused on the details of my adoption. While the lawyers were busy arguing about workplace statutes and legal precedents, she would frequently interject with her own pointed questions about my personal history. "Ms. Williams," she said, her voice cutting through the defense attorney's cross-examination, "you stated you were adopted as a toddler. Can you tell the court at what age precisely?" I was taken aback, but I answered, "I was about 2 years old, Your Honor." "And do you know the name of the adoption agency?" Confused, I replied, "It was the Serenity Children's Home, Your Honor. But it closed down many years ago." The lawyers on both sides exchanged puzzled glances. This was highly unusual. "And the year of your adoption?" the judge pressed, her voice strangely tight. 1998, Your Honor." Then she asked the question that made my heart stop beating for a second. "Ms. Williams, do you happen to know your birth name?" I shook my head, feeling that old familiar pang of sadness and mystery that always accompanied this topic. "No, Your Honor. The records were sealed. I was a Jane Doe. All my adoptive parents were told was that I was left at a church that was affiliated with the home." Judge Hayes's face, which had been so stoic and neutral throughout the trial, seemed to just crumple for a fleeting second. She took a sharp, audible breath. "This court is in recess for 1 hour," she announced, her voice strained and unfamiliar. She stood abruptly and swept out of the courtroom through a side door, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The room immediately broke into a chorus of frantic whispers. "What was that about?" Ms. Diaz murmured to me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I've been in her courtroom dozens of times. I've never, ever seen her do that." When court reconvened an hour later, the tension in the room was so thick you could taste it. Judge Hayes returned to the bench, but she looked like a different person. She was pale, and her hands, usually so steady, were visibly trembling. She looked directly at me, her gaze so intense it felt like it was piercing through my soul. "Before we proceed with this case," she began, her voice heavy with an emotion I couldn't identify, "I must make a statement. And following this statement, I will be recusing myself from this trial." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. A judge recusing herself mid-trial was a monumental event. Judge Hayes took a deep, shaky breath, her eyes still locked on mine. 27 years ago," she said, her voice raw and cracking, "I had a daughter, my only child. She was a brilliant, beautiful artist. And a struggling single mother. She was fiercely determined to raise her baby girl all on her own." Tears were now openly streaming down the judge's face. The entire courtroom was frozen, silent witnesses to this incomprehensible turn of events. "In the year 1998, she continued, her voice breaking on a sob, "my daughter made the most heartbreaking decision of her life. Convinced that she couldn't provide the life her baby girl deserved, she left her 2-year-old daughter in the care of the Serenity Children's Home. The records were sealed to protect her privacy. A few years later, my daughter passed away in a tragic car accident. I have spent the last 2 decades, every single day, trying to find my granddaughter. But the home had closed. The records were reportedly lost in a fire. She was just gone." She paused, her eyes, filled with a universe of pain and longing, never leaving mine. The whole world seemed to fade away into a muted blur. It was just me and her. "The details you provided, Ms. Williams," she said, her voice now barely a whisper. "The year. The specific home. Being a Jane Doe left at the affiliated church. They match. They match every single detail I know about the granddaughter I lost so long ago." She looked at me, a look of profound, soul-shattering recognition dawning on her face. "I cannot be an impartial judge in this case," she said, her voice finally breaking completely. "Because I believe with every fiber of my being that you, Amara Williams, are my granddaughter." The silence shattered. A collective, audible gasp echoed off the chamber walls. I saw Ms. Diaz's hand fly to her mouth in shock. Across the room, the arrogant faces of Mark, Sarah, and Kevin had morphed into masks of pure, unadulterated horror. But I barely saw them. All I could see was the woman on the bench. Judge Evelyn Hayes. My grandmother. A wave of shock so powerful it felt like a physical blow washed over me, robbing the air from my lungs, and the entire world went dark. I came to in the quiet stillness of the judge's chambers. Ms. Diaz was by my side, holding a glass of water, and so was Judge Evelyn Hayes. No, not the judge anymore. Just Evelyn. The black robe was gone. She was just a woman, her face a heartbreaking portrait of decades of grief now mixed with a fragile, terrified hope. The fallout from the courtroom revelation was immediate and catastrophic. For Innovate Architecture, the story spread like a wildfire. A new judge was assigned to the case, but it was merely a formality. Facing a public relations apocalypse of unimaginable proportions, the firm's high-priced lawyers folded instantly. They offered a settlement that was astronomical, a figure that felt like it belonged in another universe. It was no longer about the lawsuit. It was about desperate, frantic damage control. Mark, Sarah, and Kevin were fired immediately. Their careers were, for all intents and purposes, over. The story of their casual cruelty, magnified 1,000 times by the unbelievable twist of the trial, made them toxic in the industry. Mr. Henderson from HR was also fired. The entire system that had enabled and protected them simply crumbled under the weight of the scandal. Justice, in its own wild and unpredictable way, had been served. But all of that felt like it was happening to someone else in another life. My world had been completely rewritten. That afternoon, Evelyn, my grandmother, and I sat in the profound quiet of her living room. We talked for hours, our words weaving a fragile bridge across a 27-year chasm. She told me about my mother, Eleanor. She showed me photographs. Eleanor had my eyes. She had my smile. She was a painter, and her vibrant, emotional canvases covered Evelyn's walls, pulsing with a life that had been stolen too soon. She was real. Had a history. I had roots that ran deeper than I had ever known. Evelyn cried as she told me how my mother had deeply regretted the decision to give me up, but was too proud, too lost, and too young to know how to fix it. And she told me about her own tireless search, the years of dead ends, the private investigators who came up with nothing, the countless nights she spent praying for a miracle. I told her about my life, about the two incredible loving parents who raised me. A part of me worried she might feel replaced or resentful. But she just looked at me with tears of gratitude shining in her eyes. "They gave you the life Eleanor prayed you would have," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They are your family, Amara. As am I. Love doesn't divide. It multiplies." A few days later, I told my parents everything. My mom cried tears of joy, and my dad held my hand, his grip tight and reassuring. They weren't hurt. They were overjoyed for me. That weekend, my parents came to have dinner with my grandmother. Watching my dad, a devoted sports fan, animatedly talking about baseball with Evelyn, a revered Superior Court judge, while my mom showed her my baby pictures, was one of the most surreal and profoundly beautiful moments of my entire life. My family hadn't been broken or replaced. It had grown. It had multiplied. I accepted the settlement. The money felt strange and disconnected, like a bizarre side effect of the real story. But what it gave me was freedom. It's been a year since that unbelievable day in court. I didn't go back to a big architecture firm. The passion for creation is still a part of me, but the experience at Innovate, the ugliness of it all, had dimmed that fire. Maybe I'll return to it someday, but for now my path has changed. I spend my weekends with Evelyn. We have a lifetime of stories to catch up on. She tells me about my mother's rebellious streak, and I tell her about my awkward teenage years. We are two strangers bound by blood, slowly and carefully building a new relationship from the ground up. It's not always easy. It's a complex tapestry of joy and sorrow, of grieving for what was lost while celebrating what has been found. But it is ours. The mockery and cruelty I endured were born from a casual poison that grows in places where people feel powerful and others feel small. Mark and his team tried to define me by the one thing they perceived as a weakness, the one thing that made me less than them. But in their attempt to make me smaller, they inadvertently set in motion the precise chain of events that led me to the most profound and important discovery of my life. Their hate led me to my heritage. Their cruelty led me back to my family. I used a significant portion of the settlement to create the Eleanor Foundation, named for the artist's mother I never had the chance to know. It has two simple but vital missions: providing free legal resources for victims of workplace harassment, so that no one else has to feel as isolated and defeated as I did in that HR office, and offering grants and mentorship programs to young adults who are aging out of the foster care system, helping them build their own foundations for the future. I found my true purpose, not in designing beautiful buildings, but in helping to rebuild lives that have been fractured. I learned that standing up for yourself, even when your voice is shaking and your knees are weak, is the single most powerful thing a person can do. You never know where that path of resistance will lead you. For me, fighting for my dignity in a courtroom led me home. The pain they inflicted didn't break me. In the end, it revealed me. And in the strangest, most unexpected way possible, I am grateful. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, leave your like, and share this video with others.